Hello viewers, welcome to my YouTube channel. Get ready for heart-touching stories. Don't forget to subscribe and let's begin.
The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, forwarded through 3 different addresses before it finally found me. I didn't recognize the handwriting at first, it had grown shakier with age, but the moment I saw the return address my hands trembled. Sarah, it began. I stood in my kitchen, coffee growing cold beside me, and didn't read past those 2 words for nearly 10 minutes. It's strange how some wounds, even after 24 years, can reopen with just a glimpse of the person's name. My mother's name. The woman who threw me out on a December night in 1999 when I was 17 years old and pregnant. The part I never talk about. People always want the dramatic version of that story. They want to hear about the screaming match, the cruel words, the door slamming behind me. The truth was both simpler and more devastating. It was quiet, almost gentle in the most poisonous way. I remember standing in our living room, my hand instinctively moving to my belly. I was 4 months along. The test had confirmed it just that morning, and I'd spent the entire day working up the courage to tell my parents. My father was at work, my mother was folding laundry. I'm pregnant, I said. She didn't look up from the pile of whites on the coffee table, just paused, her hands stilling around my father's dress shirt. Are you sure? Yes. Have you taken a test? Yes, this morning. She set down the shirt and looked at me for a long moment. I can still see the calculation happening in her eyes, not anger but something worse. Assessment, damage control, the rapid mental mathematics of a woman figuring out how to make a problem disappear. Your father is going to be very disappointed, she said finally. Those weren't the cruelest words she'd say to me, but they were the first. They opened a door that couldn't be closed. My father's reaction that evening was exactly as predicted. Disappointment, yes, but also something closer to disgust. I was their only child, a straight-A student with early acceptance to 3 universities. I was supposed to be their legacy, their proof that they'd done something right. The baby's father, Marcus, a boy I'd known since freshman year, wanted to do the right thing. He was terrified and only 17 as well, but he wanted to try. My parents shut that down immediately. They forbade me from seeing him, they called his parents. They made phone calls to the school and began the paperwork to have me finish my senior year at home. For 3 months they treated me with a kind of controlled coldness. Not openly hostile but profoundly distant. I was fed, I was clothed, but I was no longer their daughter. I was the situation they were managing. Then came the night that changed everything. The ejection. I went into labor on a Tuesday night in December, 2 weeks before my due date. My mother drove me to the hospital. My father waited in the lobby. Both were present when my son was born at 3:47 in the morning, a tiny, perfect boy with Marcus's eyes. I named him David. For exactly 16 hours I thought everything might be okay. My mother held him, my father took photographs. There was a moment, just a moment, when my mother looked down at her newborn grandson and I saw something soften in her face, but the moment passed. On the second morning my father came to the hospital with a manila folder. Inside were papers I didn't fully understand, agreements, documents, legal language. What I understood clearly was this: they could not support another child, they could not raise their daughter and a baby, they could not throw away their lives for my mistake. What do you want me to do? I asked, though some part of me already knew. You have options, my father said carefully. Adoption, you're young, you can still go to college. You can still have a life. I'm keeping him, I said, holding David tighter. My mother, standing by the window, didn't turn around. Then you're on your own. Survival mode. The next 4 days are a blur of shock and disbelief. I stayed in the hospital as long as insurance would allow, terrified of the moment I'd have to leave. A nurse named Patricia, bless her, helped me figure out the logistics of life as a teenage mother with no family support, and $847 to my name. On a cold December afternoon, I walked out of that hospital carrying a baby and a diaper bag with no idea where I was going. I ended up at a shelter that first night, then a friend's couch, then a series of minimum wage jobs, late night shifts, and the kind of poverty that teaches you things about yourself you never want to know. I worked retail, food service, cleaning houses. I studied during David's nap times. I got my GED at 19. I worked my way through community college at 23, taking night classes while David slept in a borrowed bassinet in the next room. By the time David was 5, I had an associate's degree and a decent job at a marketing firm. We had a small apartment, nothing fancy, but it was ours. By the time he was 10, I'd earned my bachelor's degree and worked my way up to a junior manager position. By the time he was 15, I'd bought a house. I didn't do it perfectly. There were nights I cried from exhaustion. There were months when I was late on rent and weeks when I chose between paying for childcare and buying groceries. There were moments I resented David for existing, which filled me with crushing guilt because he'd done nothing to deserve that resentment. He was just a kid who'd had the misfortune of being born to a teenage mother abandoned by her own parents, but I did it. We made it. David grew up knowing his story. I never hid from him what happened, though I was careful to do it without poisoning his relationship with his grandparents, even though they'd rejected him. They made a choice based on their fears and limitations, I told him. That says something about them, not about you. He was a good kid, a great kid. He became a good man. He got into a good college and studied engineering. He got married and had 2 kids of his own, my grandchildren, who would never know their great-grandparents because those people had decided their reputation and their comfort were worth more than their family. I made peace with that, or I thought I had. 24 years life moved forward. It does, whether you're ready or not. I got remarried to a kind man named Robert when David was 8. I eventually became a senior marketing director. We expanded the house. We took vacations. We built a life. I wasn't wealthy, but I was stable. More importantly, I'd built something from nothing. I'd proven something to myself, and I'd built a very clear boundary. My parents were dead to me. Not literally, not yet, but in every way that mattered. I didn't contact them. I didn't respond when they sent Christmas cards in the mail, which they did every year from about year 3 onward, as if generic holiday sentiments could bridge the canyon of abandonment they'd created. I didn't think about them. Or I told myself I didn't, but the truth is that trauma doesn't work on a schedule. It doesn't politely fade. It lingers in the background, in how I held David a little too tight when he was sick, in how I never let him go to sleep without telling him I loved him, and how I made damn sure he knew he was wanted. So when that letter arrived in March, nearly a quarter century after they'd thrown me out, it didn't come from nowhere. It came from a place that had always been there, a wound that had scarred over but never truly healed. Sarah, it began, I don't know if you'll even read this far. I wouldn't blame you if you didn't, but I'm asking you to try. Your father had a stroke last month. He survived, but he can't speak properly and the left side of his body is weak. The doctors say he may recover more function with time, but he'll never be what he was. I'm 74 years old and I can't lift him out of bed or care for him the way he needs. We need help. Know what we did? I've known for a long time. I've spent 24 years knowing exactly what kind of people we were to you, and I've spent 24 years being unable to undo it. I don't expect your forgiveness. I'm not writing to ask for it. I'm writing because I'm desperate and because you're the only one who can help. Call. Mom, the reckoning. I read that letter 7 times over the course of that day. I read it while at work. I read it while sitting in my car during lunch. I read it while Robert slept beside me that night. Each time I had a different reaction: anger, pity, rage, sorrow, compassion, resentment, guilt, resistance. David called that evening for our regular Wednesday chat. I didn't tell him about the letter. By Friday, I still hadn't told him. I'd also not called my mother, which felt like both a triumph and a failure. Quiet, Robert said that evening. What's going on? I told him about the letter. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he said, what do you want to do? That was the question, wasn't it? What did I want? What did I owe them? Part of me, a considerable part, wanted them to suffer. I wanted them to understand, viscerally and completely, what it felt like to be rejected by the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally. I wanted them to experience the fear I'd felt, the desperation, the humiliation of asking for help and being turned away. But another part of me, quieter but persistent, remembered that I had chosen to build a different kind of life. I had chosen to be the kind of parent who showed up, who loved unconditionally, who tried even when it was hard. Was that person capable of turning away her own parents in their moment of crisis? I didn't know. I need to talk to David, I said. The conversation with my son David came over the next morning. He was 31 now, with his own kids, his own life, but he was still the little boy I'd carried through the world. He was still the person who'd made my impossible life mean something. We sat at the kitchen table, the same kitchen table where we'd eaten countless meals together, where I'd helped him with homework and listened to his heartbreaks and celebrated his victories. I told him everything. Not the version I'd told him when he was old enough to understand, the sanitized version where his grandparents couldn't handle the situation. The real version, the details, the coldness, the rejection, the papers on the hospital bed. He listened with his hands folded on the table, and when I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Are you going to see them? He asked finally. I don't know. Are you angry that I'm considering it? No, he said. He shook his head. I'm angry they made you consider it at all, but I'm not angry at you for thinking about it. He paused. Do you want to see them? I don't know, I admitted. I hate them, but I don't want to be the kind of person who lets that hate consume me. Then maybe go, he said. Not for them, for you, to figure out what you need to feel resolved about this. I called my mother 3 days later. Her voice on the phone was uncertain, fragile in a way I'd never heard before. It's really you, she said. Yes, I don't know what to say. You could start by telling me how Dad is doing. I made an appointment to visit the following Saturday. The house looked smaller than I remembered. That's what people always say, and I'd always thought it was just nostalgia skewing their perception, but it was true. The house where I'd grown up, where I'd been asked to leave, seemed diminished somehow. My mother opened the door before I could knock. She looked small too. She'd aged significantly in the 24 years since I'd seen her, though that was unavoidable. Her hair was white. Her hands shook slightly. She looked like someone's grandmother, not someone's mother, and the cognitive dissonance of that struck me hard. Oh, Sarah, she said, and her voice broke. I didn't hug her. I couldn't, not yet. My father was in a hospital bed in what used to be the formal living room. He'd been a big man once, imposing in a way that had terrified me as a teenager. Now he was diminished by the stroke, his left side slack, his eyes tracking me with an expression I couldn't quite read. When he saw me, he made a sound, not words, just a sound of distress or recognition or something. He knows you, my mother said softly. He's been asking for you. I think he understands what happened, what he did, and he wants to. Don't, I said. Don't speak for him, don't make excuses. We stood there in awkward silence. I'm not here to forgive you, I said to both of them, though primarily to the shell of my father in the bed. I'm not here to say it's okay, it's not okay. It was never okay, and nothing that happens now will make it okay. My mother flinched but didn't interrupt. What I'm here to do is understand what I need to understand to move forward with my life. And right now I'm trying to figure out if there's anything here worth salvaging, or if this is just going to be something I carry. Weeks that followed, I didn't commit to anything that day. But I also didn't leave and never come back. Over the next several months, I visited every Saturday. I helped my mother with her medical decisions regarding my father's care. I listened to her stories about guilt and regret, and a woman who'd made catastrophic choices based on fear and social shame and the limitations of her own capacity for grace. She didn't ask for forgiveness. But she did ask for the chance to know me now as an adult in whatever limited way I was willing to allow. I let her see pictures of David. I brought my grandchildren over and I watched her face transform as she held them, watched the love and regret war with each other in her expression. My father died 6 months after that first letter arrived. He never regained his ability to speak, which meant he never got to apologize either. Maybe that was for the best. Maybe apologies wouldn't have changed anything. Maybe his silence was actually a mercy. It left space for me to decide what I needed without having to navigate his attempt to manage his own emotional fallout. After he died, my mother and I continued our Saturday visits. Not because everything was resolved, but because it turned out that resolution wasn't a destination. It was a process, it was ongoing. It was me deciding week after week that I could sit with her without losing myself. That I could acknowledge her humanity without absolving her of responsibility. That I could maintain a boundary while still showing up. What I learned, David asked me once, a few years after my father's death, if I'd forgiven them. I'm not sure that's the right question, I told him. I've accepted that they were people with limitations they couldn't overcome. I've understood that their choices were about their own fears and failures, not about my worth. But forgiveness implies that I've released the hurt, and I'm not sure that's possible or even necessary. The hurt is part of my story now. It made me who I am. That enough? He asked. I think so, I said. It has to be. My mother died 4 years ago. At her funeral, I gave a eulogy that was honest in a way that probably made some people uncomfortable. I talked about the woman I'd become in spite of her, and the woman I'd come to understand her as flawed, limited, doing the best she could with the emotional resources she had. I don't have any regrets about reconnecting with her. But I also don't have any illusions about what that reconnection was. It wasn't a triumphant reconciliation or a Lifetime movie ending where everything was healed. It was just two people figuring out how to be in the same room, how to acknowledge history without being destroyed by it. 24 years. It took 24 years for my parents to show up at my door, not physically but through that letter. And in those 24 years, I'd built a life they never could have given me. A life of resilience and hard work and unconditional love for my son. A life that was entirely my own. Sometimes I think about who I would have been if they'd supported me. Would I have become the person who raised David the way I did? Would I have learned the kind of strength that comes from having no choice but to be strong? Would I have understood my own capacity to survive? I'll never know. But I do know this: the girl they threw out was 17 and alone and terrified. The woman who chose to reconnect with them 24 years later was someone entirely different, someone they'd never known, someone their rejection had created. And that woman was strong enough to forgive, not quickly, not easily, but genuinely. Not for them, but for herself. That is the story I choose to tell now.